December 17, 1944, 05:47 hours. Hansfeld, Belgium. The Panther's engine rattled twice, then fell silent. Oberleutnant Klaus Weber slammed his gloved fist against the steel hull, the sound swallowed by the pre-dawn fog. His driver, Gefreiter Manfred Stein, tried the ignition again. Nothing. Just the wind howling through the Ardennes forest and the wheeze of dying machinery. "Fuel tanks empty, Herr Oberleutnant," Stein called up, his voice hollow. "Reserve 2." Weber dropped from the turret, boots hitting frozen mud. Around him, Germany's last great gamble sat paralyzed. 19 panzers, 32 half-tracks, nearly 800 men, all the steel and courage the Reich could scrape together for Operation Wacht am Rhein. Motionless. Defeated not by American guns, but by empty tanks. Through the lifting mist, Weber saw it. An American supply point, abandoned so hastily that smoke still curled from barrel fires. Coffee steamed in tin cups beside half-eaten rations. And there, stretching into the fog like salvation itself, stood formations of jerry cans. Hundreds of them. Thousands. The distinctive American olive drab, gleaming with morning dew. Weber approached slowly, each step feeling like prayer. His adjutant, Lieutenant Franz Richter, pried open the first container, the sharp smell of benzene cutting through the cold. High-octane American gasoline. Behind them, exhausted soldiers began to run, shouting, weeping with relief as they grabbed containers and rushed toward their vehicles. Weber walked among the stockpile, counting. The mathematics staggered him. 50,000 gallons, enough to fuel his entire battalion to the Meuse River. Enough to buy them another week of war. The Americans had abandoned more petroleum in this single crossroads depot than his division had received in the past half-year. But as Weber stood in that forest clearing, watching German hands pour American fuel into German tanks, a truth settled over him heavier than the winter fog. If they can afford to abandon this much, his hand found a shipping manifest nailed to a wooden crate. He read it once, then again slower, each line a nail in a coffin. Origin: East Texas oil field, Kilgore. Transit: Houston, New York Harbor, Liverpool, Cherbourg, Hansfeld. Distance: 6,247 miles. Transit time: 41 days. Quantity: 50,000 gallons. Shipment number 4721. Shipment number 4021. Weber's breath caught. This fuel had crossed an ocean, had traveled further than most Germans would ever go in their lifetime. And it was marked as routine delivery number 4721. A number so high it implied thousands of identical shipments, an endless conveyor belt of petroleum flowing from a land of such abundance that this depot, this miraculous salvation for his battalion, was nothing more than spillage. Before we continue, click that subscribe button, like this video, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It brings me great joy knowing that these war stories and lessons get to people all over the world. Your support helps us bring more thrilling war stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now let's get back to the story. He looked at his men, faces gaunt from months of retreat, uniforms patched and repatched, celebrating this captured fuel as if they'd seized the Holy Grail itself. And perhaps they had, in a sense. But the Americans? They'd left it behind the way a rich man discards pocket change. Germany hadn't just miscalculated the odds. Germany had fundamentally failed to comprehend the enemy's nature. They were fighting an empire that measured oil not in precious gallons, but in oceans. 6 months earlier, in June 1944, while Weber had been fighting in Normandy, Reichsminister Albert Speer had delivered a report to Hitler's headquarters that should have ended all offensive operations immediately. Germany's synthetic fuel production, the artificial lifeblood keeping the Wehrmacht's heart beating, was hemorrhaging under Allied bombing. The first jerry-can Franz Richter opened splashed gasoline onto the frozen ground, and the sharp petroleum smell cut through the winter air like a benediction. Within seconds, the entire clearing erupted. "Benzin! Benzin!" The shout rippled through Weber's column like wildfire. Men who moments before had sat slumped against useless machinery now sprinted toward the depot, their exhaustion forgotten. Gefreiterstein grabbed 2 cans and ran back to the Panther, laughing, actually laughing, for the first time in months. Weber stood motionless, watching his battalion transform. Soldiers who'd marched through hell since Normandy, who'd lost friends at Falaise, who'd retreated across France with barely enough fuel to keep their vehicles moving, now moved with purpose again, with hope. "Herr Oberleutnant," Richter appeared, breathless, eyes bright. "Preliminary count, approximately 10,000 cans, 5 gallons each. That's 50,000 gallons." Weber's voice came out hoarse. "I know." Enough. Finally, enough. Enough to reach the Meuse. Enough to complete their objectives. Enough to prove that Germany's final gamble might actually succeed. Around him, the depot revealed itself in the growing light. The Americans had fled so hastily, they'd left everything. Fuel arranged in perfect geometric stacks, spare parts still in crates, even a half-track with keys in the ignition. It was as if fate itself had intervened, placing exactly what Germany needed most precisely where Weber's column would find it. Obergefreiter Koch, his weathered tank commander, approached with something like reverence in his expression. "Sir, in 3 years on the Eastern Front, I never saw this much fuel in one place, not even in our own depots before Kursk." Weber nodded slowly. The mathematics were almost obscene. This single abandoned American supply point contained more petroleum than entire German panzer divisions received quarterly. In the pre-dawn light, with his men refueling their vehicles, with the engines coughing back to life one by one, Weber felt something he'd thought died at Stalingrad. Certainty. Perhaps the High Command had been right. Perhaps Germany's legendary resilience, her soldiers' superior training and courage, could overcome material disadvantages. The Americans were rich, yes, wastefully, carelessly, but they were also soft, quick to retreat, quick to abandon their advantages. The Panther's engine roared to life behind him. Then another, then another. The mechanical chorus built until the entire forest vibrated with the sound of German armor awakening. His men cheered, their voices hoarse but genuine. Richter stood beside Weber, both of them watching the transformation. "Permission to speak freely, Herr Oberleutnant?" "Granted. Perhaps we were wrong. About the offensive. About our chances." Richter's voice carried something Weber hadn't heard in months: conviction. "If we can find supplies like this, if the Americans retreat this easily, maybe we actually can reach Antwerp." Weber wanted to believe him. God, how he wanted to believe. For one crystalline moment, standing in that Belgian forest, with American fuel flowing into German tanks, he did believe. Destiny had spoken. Germany would survive after all. Then his boot struck something in the mud, a shipping manifest. Its edges frozen stiff. He bent to pick it up. The manifest was printed on thick American paper, somehow still crisp despite the morning frost. Weber's English was serviceable, mandatory for officers since '43, and he read slowly, his breath misting in the cold air. U.S. Army Quartermaster Corps Shipment, Manifest Number 4021J. Origin: East Texas Oilfield, Kilgore. Processed: Houston Refinery, Texas. Port of Embarkation: New York Harbor, Atlantic. Transit: SS Liberty Ship. James Madison. Port of Entry: Liverpool, England. Channel Crossing: Southampton to Cherbourg. Final Delivery: Hansfeld. Forward Supply Point. Total distance: 6,247 miles. Transit time, 41 days. Quantity, 50,000 gallons, high-octane motor fuel. Weber read it again. Then a third time, 6,000 miles. Across an ocean, through enemy submarines, across England, across the Channel, through France, to this insignificant Belgian crossroads, in 41 days. His hands trembled slightly as he bent to retrieve another document half buried in the mud. A logistics report, carelessly discarded. Weekly fuel allocation. 12th Army Group, 8.4 million gallons. Delivered, 8.9 million gallons. Surplus, 500,000 gallons. Transferred to reserve stockpiles. Weber's accounting mind performed calculations automatically. 8 million gallons per week. That meant he worked through the numbers, feeling his certainty crumble with each multiplication. Over 1 million gallons daily, just for one army group. The Americans had multiple army groups in Europe. Herr Oberleutnant? Richter approached, still smiling. The men are asking when we advance. Morale is, look at this. Weber thrust the manifest at him. Richter scanned it, his smile fading. I don't understand. What am I seeing? Shipment number 4721. Weber's voice sounded distant to his own ears. Series J, of 1944. That implies at least 4,120 previous shipments in this series alone, and probably multiple series. But that's impossible. Weber laughed, the sound bitter. No, that's America. He walked to the nearest pyramid of jerry cans, running his gloved hand along the cold metal. Each can bore stamped markings, production dates, batch numbers, factory codes. He began reading them aloud, his voice mechanical. March 44, Ohio. April 44, California. May 44, Texas. June 44, Pennsylvania. He turned to face Richter. Do you understand? They're producing so much fuel they need factories in multiple states. They're producing so much they can ship it halfway around the world and still have surplus. Behind them, the celebration continued. Soldiers sang as they refueled vehicles. Someone had found American cigarettes and was distributing them like prizes. The sound of engines running felt like victory. But Weber stood frozen, the manifest clutched in his hand, doing mathematics that led to only one conclusion. Germany's entire petroleum production for 1944, every synthetic plant, every captured Romanian well, every precious liter, would barely equal what the Americans transported across the Atlantic in a single month, perhaps less. The 50,000 gallons surrounding him, this miracle that had restored his men's faith, represented roughly 6 hours of American petroleum consumption in Europe. 6 hours. Franz, Weber said quietly, using Richter's first name for the first time. We're not fighting an army. We're fighting an oil field with a flag. They reached Stavelo 2 days later, December 19th, just as the sun broke through the overcast sky. Weber's column had made good progress on the captured American fuel, 40 kilometers in 36 hours, better than they'd managed in weeks. Then they saw the smoke. A black column rose from the valley ahead, so thick it looked solid against the winter sky, not the gray smoke of burning wood or the white of destroyed buildings. This was petroleum smoke, dense, oily, roiling upward in a pillar that must have been visible for 20 kilometers. Mein Gott, Richter whispered beside him. Weber raised his binoculars. Through the lenses, he saw Stavelo's fuel depot, or what remained of it. The Americans had ignited it before withdrawing. Flames towered 15 meters high, fed by rivers of burning gasoline that flowed through the streets like lava. The heat shimmer made the entire valley waver like a mirage. An Unteroffizier from the reconnaissance unit arrived, his face soot-stained. Sir, the engineers estimate 2 million gallons were stored there, maybe more, all burning. 2 million gallons. Weber lowered the binoculars slowly. 2 million. 40 times what they'd captured at Hounsfeld. Enough to fuel the entire Ardennes offensive. Enough to reach Antwerp, Brussels, perhaps even back to the Rhine if they had to retreat. 2 million gallons that could have changed everything. The Americans had simply set it on fire. "Can we salvage anything?" Richter asked, though his voice held no hope. "Look at it, Franz." Weber pointed toward the inferno. "They've turned the entire depot into hell itself. The fuel is flowing into the Amblève River. The river is burning. Do you see? The river is on fire." They watched in silence as American demolition work achieved perfection. Storage tanks exploded at intervals, sending fresh fireballs into the sky. The heat was so intense Weber could feel it on his face from a kilometer away. His men had stopped their vehicles, mesmerized by the destruction of something they would have died to capture. Gefreiter Stein approached hesitantly. "Sir, the men are asking, why didn't they just abandon it, like at Hounsfeld?" Weber had no answer. Or rather, he had an answer he didn't want to speak aloud, because Hounsfeld meant nothing to them. This, apparently, was worth destroying. The mathematics carved themselves into his mind. 2 million gallons, burning. The Americans had chosen to waste, to literally incinerate more fuel than Germany's entire Ardennes offensive had been allocated. They'd chosen fire over German capture, which meant the fuel's value to them wasn't in the fuel itself, but in denying it to Germany. It meant 50,000 gallons at Hounsfeld had been an oversight, a mistake, an amount too small to bother destroying. Weber thought of his men's celebration 2 days ago, their laughter, their renewed faith, all of it based on capturing what America considered acceptable losses. "How much fuel do we have left?" he asked quietly. Richter consulted his notes. "Approximately 12,000 gallons, enough for maybe 30 kilometers of combat operations." 30 kilometers. Weber looked at the burning river, at the smoke column that seemed to reach heaven itself, at this temple of wasted abundance. Somewhere in America, in places called Texas and Oklahoma and California, oil still flowed from the ground. And here, in Belgium, it flowed into rivers and burned for no purpose except to prove a point. The point was clear. You cannot win. The Panther died on a hill 3 kilometers east of Trois Ponts. No dramatic failure this time, no sputtering protest. Just a quiet mechanical sigh as the fuel pump drew air instead of gasoline. And 44 tons of German engineering became an immobile monument to arithmetic. "Everyone out," Weber ordered. "We push." His crew stared at him. Obergefreiter Koch spoke what they were all thinking. "Sir, it's a Panther. It weighs. I know what it weighs. Out, now!" 20 men put their shoulders to the tank. Then 30. Then 40. The Panther moved perhaps 50 meters before the men collapsed, gasping, their breath steaming in the December cold. Behind them, 2 more tanks had stopped. Then a half-track. Then another tank. Weber's radio crackled. "Kampfgruppe Weber. This is division. Report status." He lifted the handset, weighing his words. 7 vehicles immobilized due to fuel exhaustion, proceeding on foot with infantry elements. Static. Then, unacceptable. Your orders are to maintain offensive momentum, capture enemy fuel supplies, and continue advance. Weber looked at his exhausted men, at the tanks they'd pushed like ancient Egyptians moving stone blocks, at the forest road ahead that led where? Toward what? Request clarification. Intelligence indicates all forward American depots have been destroyed or evacuated. Then you will find others. The success of WWII am Rhein depends on aggressive action. Division expects results, not excuses. Heil Hitler. The radio went dead. Richter stood beside the Panther, his uniform soaked with sweat despite the cold. "What are our orders, sir?" Weber didn't answer immediately. He was watching Gefreiter Stein, 19 years old, conscripted 8 months ago, trying to catch his breath after pushing a tank. The boy's hands were bleeding where frozen metal had torn through his gloves. Capture more fuel or die trying. The order made sense only if you believed fuel existed to be captured. If you believed the Americans were still retreating carelessly, still abandoning supplies, still making mistakes. If you believed Hansfeld was a pattern rather than an exception. But Weber had seen Stavelot, had watched 2 million gallons burn rather than fall into German hands. The Americans weren't careless. They were abundant. There was a difference, and that difference was everything. "Sir?" Richter pressed. Weber looked down the column. 18 functional vehicles remained from the 37 they'd started with. The rest sat scattered across 60 kilometers of Belgian roads, empty steel hulks marking their advance like tombstones. His men, the survivors of Normandy, Falaise, the long retreat across France, waited for orders they still believed would lead somewhere. What is the purpose of command, Weber thought, when the commanded are being ordered toward inevitable failure? A commander's duty was to accomplish the mission. But what if the mission was impossible? What if the entire strategic premise was built on fantasy? Did duty require him to march these men toward death for a few more kilometers of frozen Belgian mud? "We continue on foot," Weber finally said. "Infantry advance. We'll commandeer any vehicles we find." The words felt hollow. They both knew they wouldn't find any. December 22nd. The farmhouse outside Manhay had become Weber's command post by default, the only structure still standing with walls intact enough to block the wind. His remaining officers gathered around a table lit by a single kerosene lamp, their faces hollowed by exhaustion and hunger. A courier from division arrived just after nightfall, delivering dispatches in a leather satchel marked Geheim, secret. Weber broke the seal and began reading, then stopped, read again. "Franz, come here." Richter moved to his shoulder. The document was an intelligence summary, captured from an American supply convoy 2 days prior. Someone at division had bothered to translate it. Chafe Logistics Summary. Week of December 17 to 24th, 1944. Daily fuel consumption. European theater, 7.2 million gallons. Daily fuel delivery. European theater, 7.8 million gallons. Current reserve stockpiles, 147 million gallons. Weber read the numbers aloud, his voice flat. 7.2 million gallons, per day, not per week, not per month, per day. The officers fell silent. Someone coughed. No one spoke. Weber did the mathematics mechanically, a reflex from his accounting days. We captured 50,000 gallons at Hansfeld. The Americans consume 7.2 million daily. Our miracle, he paused, represents approximately 10 minutes of American fuel consumption in Europe. Hauptmann Gruber, the oldest officer present, removed his spectacles and cleaned them slowly. That cannot be correct. The translation must be wrong. The translation is correct. Weber pulled out the original English document, pointing to the typed figures. 7.2 million gallons daily. And look here, their reserves. 147 million gallons stockpiled. That's, he calculated, more than 3 times Germany's total annual petroleum production, just sitting in warehouses. Richter sank into a chair. So Stavelot's 2 million gallons, 4 hours of American operations. Weber's voice was hollow. They burned 4 hours' worth of fuel rather than let us have it, because to them it was only 4 hours. Acceptable losses. The lamp flickered. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, dusting the abandoned German vehicles that lined the road like a graveyard of steel. Lieutenant Becker, the youngest officer, spoke hesitantly. "But, sir, If these numbers are accurate, how did division expect us to— They didn't. Weber cut him off. They hoped. They gambled. They sent us to capture what doesn't exist in capturable quantities. After the officers dispersed, Weber sat alone with his journal. The leather-bound book had followed him from Stalingrad, through Kursk, through the whole long catastrophe of retreat. He opened it to a blank page and wrote by lamplight, December 22, 1944, outside Manhay. We have been outproduced, outmatched, and outmaneuvered not by superior tactics or courage, but by something more fundamental— capacity. The Americans fight with the limitless abundance of their factories and oil fields. We fight with the limited courage of our soldiers. It is not enough. It was never enough. We fight gods with horses. He closed the journal and listened to the wind. Somewhere in the darkness, his remaining men huddled around fires made from shattered furniture, burning wood because they had no fuel. Tomorrow they would be ordered forward again. Tomorrow they would continue the advance until the mathematics finally, inevitably, brought them to zero. December 24th, 1944. Christmas Eve. The Americans closed the trap at dawn. Weber heard them before he saw them. The distinctive roar of Sherman tanks, dozens of them, their engines fed by fuel supplies that never ran dry. Artillery began falling at 0600 hours, methodical and precise, walking up the road toward his position. His command consisted of 43 men, 2 functional half-tracks, and 1 Panther with enough fuel for perhaps 2 kilometers of movement. Against them, an entire American armored battalion, fresh and fully supplied, their tanks advancing through the snow like a mechanical tide. Richter appeared in the farmhouse doorway, his face gray. "Sir, radio contact with division is lost. Reconnaissance reports American forces have cut the road behind us. We're surrounded." Weber nodded slowly. He'd expected this. The mathematics had always led here. Orders, Herr Oberleutnant? What orders could he give? Fight until the last bullet? Watch his men die for a few more meters of frozen ground? For what strategic purpose? The offensive had failed. Everyone knew it, even if division hadn't admitted it yet. Kampfgruppe Piper was trapped somewhere to the north. Other battle groups had been pushed back or destroyed. The grand gamble had produced only a temporary bulge in American lines, bought with fuel Germany didn't have, and blood it couldn't afford to spend. "Prepare to destroy all equipment," Weber said quietly. "We surrender at 1400 hours." Richter's eyes widened. "Sir, you'll be court-martialed? For what? Losing a war that was lost before we started?" Weber stood, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. "Gather the men. Tell them. Tell them they fought well. Tell them it's over." By noon, the work began. His soldiers moved like ghosts, placing demolition charges on vehicles they'd pushed through snow, maintained through impossible conditions, loved the way soldiers love the machines that keep them alive. Gefreiter Stein wept openly as he set explosives on the Panther's engine block. Weber saved his own task for last. The half-track that had carried him since Normandy sat at the edge of the farmyard, its fuel gauge reading empty except for whatever residue remained in the tank. He opened the petcock, watching the last drops of American gasoline, captured at Hansfeld, hoarded carefully, stretched across impossible distances, drip onto the frozen ground. He struck a match. The fuel ignited with a soft whump, flames spreading across the pooled gasoline. Weber fed the fire with papers from the vehicle, maps that showed objectives never reached, orders that promised victory through will alone. Logistics reports that proved the impossible arithmetic of Germany's situation. As the half-track burned, Weber thought of Stavelot, of 2 million gallons set ablaze because they meant so little to the Americans. Now he was doing the same, burning his last fuel not for warmth or power, but as an act of symbolic surrender. The difference was, America had burned excess. He was burning everything. The demolitions began at 1330 hours. One by one, German vehicles exploded, their steel frames collapsing like dying animals. The sound echoed across the valley, not the thunder of battle, but the quiet death rattle of an army that had finally run dry. At 1400 hours, Weber walked toward American lines with his hands raised, 43 men following behind, not defeated by bullets, by gallons. 40 years later, the museum smelled faintly of oil and dust, as if the ghosts of engines still breathed somewhere beneath the concrete floor. The Panther sat in silence, its armor dulled to a gray-brown patina, turret frozen in its last command. A small plaque read, Panzerkampfwagen V, Panther. Abandoned, Ardennes Offensive, December 1944. Oberleutnant Klaus Weber, now 70, stood before it, hands clasped behind his back. His reflection warped faintly across the glass barrier. The tank was smaller than he remembered, the way giants shrink when memory finally releases them. A group of schoolchildren passed, whispering about how cool it looked, how unstoppable it must have been. Weber almost smiled. Once, he had believed that too. A voice beside him broke the silence. An American, gray-haired, with a veteran's jacket and an easy posture. His name tag read Anderson, U.S. 3rd Army. "So you were one of them?" the American asked, nodding toward the Panther. Weber's lips curved faintly. "Yes, one of the last." Anderson looked at the tank thoughtfully. "We used to joke that you boys ran on fumes. Turns out, it wasn't a joke." Weber chuckled softly. "No, we ran on faith. Fumes would have been an improvement." The American's gaze lingered on the display placard detailing the Battle of the Bulge. "We burned more fuel that week than you ever had." Weber nodded, not bitterly, but with the calm of a man who had made peace with arithmetic. "That's why you won," he said quietly. "Not because of courage, not even strategy. Because you could afford to make mistakes and still move forward." He stepped closer to the glass, studying the rusted fuel port near the tank's side, the same hatch he had once opened with trembling hands, watching American gasoline pour in like liquid salvation. "We thought we'd captured a miracle," he murmured, "but it was only a drop from your ocean." Anderson folded his arms, glancing at him with respect. "Funny thing," he said. "These days, even we forget what that meant, the weight behind every gallon. All that steel, rubber, sweat, oil, and distance. People see victory. They don't see supply lines." Weber smiled faintly. "That is the true lesson of war, the invisible triumphs, the ones that roar quietly." The two men stood in silence for a while, two survivors from opposite sides of the same mathematics. Outside, through the museum's glass wall, the afternoon sun hit a parked fuel truck, its chrome tank gleaming. Weber's reflection merged with it for a moment, old soldier and modern engine, before fading into the light. He turned to leave, his footsteps echoing softly down the corridor. Behind him the Panther stood motionless, its engine silent forever. But somewhere deep within the museum's stillness, Weber thought he could still hear it, that faint, distant hum of an empire that once measured victory in gallons. History remembers the battles men fought, but it was the fuel beneath their feet that decided who would reach tomorrow.